like this, man. He's like a butterfly flapping his wings deep down in the forest, man. It's gonna cause a tree fall like 5,000 miles away, man. There ain't nobody seeing nobody. Man, see, like, you don't even know, man. It's like you're born into this world, man. And you got like that, man. The dust and wind, man. Or like the dang old candle, man. It don't matter, man. It's all the time.
All right, Seth Waggener, welcome to the show. How you doing, man?
I'm great. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you on. We've been talking about this for a while, and I'm excited to finally put it together. Before we launch into it, could you describe who you are and what you do for my audience?
Yeah, the Reader's Digest version. My name's Seth Waggener. I've been living out here. I'm in Virginia now, but I've lived all over. I was a successful TV news producer in a past life for NBC and CBS News. I was a spokesperson for the governor of Wyoming for a couple of years, and then sort of branched out, was an entrepreneur for a little while, got in the cannabis industry out in Colorado, and then moved out here. After that went belly up. Moved out here almost 3 years ago now, and I coach at the jiu-jitsu gym that we have here. My brothers, a lot of my family lives out here, and I moved out here like 3 years ago. So I coach there. I also do some video editing and stuff. I'm working on a documentary right now that I'm happily taking a break from editing to join you tonight. So.
Well, definitely, man. I'm kind of curious because I actually don't know. What was the process of working in TV industry like, and how do you end up leaving?
It's such an embarrassing part of my life now. When I think about where I was politically, where I am now, and how I view journalism, I really was a victim of the propaganda. I didn't know any better. I was 18 or 19. My dad brought home, he rented me a movie because I was homesick from school. And he brought me All the President's Men. And I thought Woodward and Bernstein were, heroes and not just despicable journalists, but and it inspired me to go into that career. I had a very successful career, about 18 years. I was producer, senior producer, eventually executive producer in Raleigh, North Carolina, but the career took me all over. And I just, I was coming to my own realizations. I got married and had kids very young and got into my career. And it took me a while to kind of come to the realization of what a toxic, disgusting, despicable career path that is. And I really don't have any respect for journalism or journalists anymore. Some of that, the majority of that is firsthand, based on firsthand experience. And the other is as a consumer of it, as someone who watches the news and you know what they're up to. You see what they're up to. And I saw it firsthand. I can't imagine. I never would have made it through COVID for sure. Because even in like 2008 or whatever it was during swine flu, that's when I would stay in the career path for another 7 years. But that's where I first sort of started to realize just what a clown show it was. They really, really, really tried to make swine flu what they did with COVID. It was the exact same playbook. And a lot of people don't remember this, but they tried and it just didn't take. Every single night, it was swine flu, H1N1, all this. It was total bullshit. And I saw it firsthand. And eventually it took, like I said, it took me a while, but eventually I was able to escape those chains.
Yeah, this is one of the things we were talking about recently is the different sort of radicalization moments.
Right.
And obviously, everyone kind of comes to this realization at their own pace. But I think that for different generational cohorts, there were different times. For Gen Z, right, it was that period between Donald Trump and COVID, right? Pick your poison. For me, it was a little bit earlier. And look, I always had leanings, right? I think for some people, these sort of politics are just genetic, right?
Right.
But it was the back to back of, oh shoot, what was that? The Nicholas Sandmann case, and then Brett Kavanaugh back to back. where it was very clear that basically like, oh, you know, these people, right, the media apparatus, they don't care. They just want to punish you for your, you know, your
they care.
They
care a lot. Yeah, they care a lot.
Exactly. And so one of the things we were talking about is that, you know, you sort of encountered similar sentiments, you know, and during the global war on terror. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, but you know, and before I got on, I kind of took a little break from editing, and I was just kind of thinking through some of the conversations we'd had, and that was one that stood out for sure. And you know, I wasn't radicalized by 9/11, but as I'm sort of what you would call an elder millennial. I'm 43, so I was born in 81. So I was in seminary. I was 20, going on 21 when that happened, and it patriotized me first, if that's even a word. Like most people my age, many of my friends ran off to war. They could not wait to join up. And probably if I hadn't been in seminary, I can't say that with any confidence that I wouldn't have done the same. But then I saw how they used it. I came to the realization and understanding it because of my job in journalism. I interviewed some people, and I ended up interviewing Dylan Avery, who was the director of Loose Change. Basically, if any of you guys out there are like joking around about how could anybody believe 9/11, the official story, the reason you don't believe the official story could probably be traced back to Dylan Avery. He directed this great documentary that sort of started that truther movement. And I don't know, again, I don't want to like paint myself as some like, you know, I definitely got real deep into researching all that stuff. And for sure, don't believe any kind of official narrative. But then when I saw what they did with it, not just the wars, but specifically the Patriot Act, how they turned it into Iraq, how the media went along with all of this stuff, that's really what started me down that path of being like, man, you can't trust these people at all. And you know, I actually saw in the Ken Burns Vietnam documentary does a great job of sort of explaining this phenomenon of realizing that your government will lie to you. The Vietnam soldiers, one of the guys being interviewed, he said that. He's like, you have to remember, we were the first generation that knew that their government was lying to them. And that's that. I knew, of course, by 2001, of course, we knew the government lied to us, but that really made it clear to me. It really made it black and white about it's just how they used this, even if you believe the official narrative, how they used it after that for their own means. And then, you know, a few years after that, then I went through the swine flu shit. But then for sure, like you, man, even someone who was already, I would say, probably pretty radical, right wing prior to COVID, but man, COVID just, if I wasn't off the edge yet, it hurled me off.
Well, I think that, you know, like you said earlier, that I think that really dispelled a lot of the libertarian myths that people in our have.
Yeah.
Right. It was like, no, you don't understand. They will not leave you alone. They will literally inject something into your bloodstream. And I should say, as someone who has a YouTube channel with one strike on it, I believe in all the science, every bit of it. But I think that, you know, that really is a significant piece of the political radicalization you see, you know, because you hear a lot from kind of like centrist types bemoaning like, oh, why can't we go back to politics as normal? Well, there are a couple things. One, what do we qualify as normal, right? Was it the 90s when, you know, the ATF was, you know, raiding Ruby Ridge and, you know, the Branch Davidians, right? And look, like, I'm not the biggest fan of the Branch Davidians, but they weren't really hurting anyone. Okay.
Exactly.
Well,
exactly.
Was it the 2000s when we were, you know, making up stories about WMDs and, you know, saying anyone who wouldn't go along with it was a traitor? Okay. Was it the Obama era? Like this kind of normalcy it's
every decade, right?
Exactly. And so you take that and you're like, all right, well, let's throw that out. But on the other side, it's like, well, how do you live in a country with people who are totally okay ginning up riots to burn down your city, you know, transing your kids and forcing you to inject something into your bloodstream? It's like, well, how do you live in a country?
I mean, I would go even a step further and say, how do you live in a country where half the country hates you and wants you dead? Because that's really what it is, man. They hate us. They hate us, and saying they want us dead, it might seem extreme to say that, but if you trace it back, this is something my brother has said a lot. My brother is someone who's faced unbelievable amounts of censorship. He has a family. He makes his own money. He can't use PayPal. PayPal sees tens of thousands of dollars from him. He can't use Venmo. He can't use Stripe. Half his websites get banned. His email marketing platform, we get kicked off of. I've been the recipient of some of this as well. They're saying, we don't want you in polite society. We don't want you in the public marketplace. We want you in the street, and we want you starving. We don't want your kid to eat. How do you live in a society where that is the other side? They're ruthless, bro. We have been getting beaten down by the other side because they're ruthless and we haven't been. I won't say we're not. I'll say we haven't been. Not nearly as ruthless as they are.
Yeah, it's a good point. And look, like, and I realize we're gonna have to be delicate, right?
Sure.
For TNS, right?
Sorry,
but
you invited me on.
No, not at all, man. Look, like,
I'm just kidding.
we were no farther along than I've been before. But when we
Right.
look at this in kind of a big picture sense, it's like, okay, humans are fundamentally political, right? It's how people work. You know, Aristotle basically said man is the political animal. So that's always how it works. You know, there's always this kind of hierarchy. You know, you even see it in like a gym setting, right? There are top dogs and there are people who aren't.
Sure.
So that's just how people are. But within that, right, there's an in-group and out-group sentiment. So for instance, right, like there's in-group politics, right, which is like, well, okay, where do we go for lunch? You know, just stupid stuff like that. Or on a, you know, the scale of a nation, it's like, well, what should our tax rate be? But then you have that in-group, out-group level of politics, which is like, okay, are we going to set up statues to Satan? Yes or no? Right? Like that's a much bigger difference. That's a gulf, right, of two completely incompatible worldviews. And I think one of the
to put people in jail for kicking over that statue.
Exactly, right? Those are two things that cannot be there's no compromise that can be made between those two positions. So I actually want to, and look, I'll loop this back around. But you know, you were talking about earlier how you know obviously been involved in the jiu-jitsu space for a long time. What are the politics like in that space? Because I think for a lot of people, when they think jiu-jitsu, they think, you know, Joe Rogan, you know, Eddie Bravo, kind of, you know, stoner leftists on the internet.
Yes, there's a lot of that too. But probably jiu-jitsu is one of the ultimate meritocracies, right? You can't fake anything out there. You can't identify. You can say I'm a purple belt or I'm a black belt, you know, but I'm going to kick your ass and everyone's going to see that you're not. So it's like you either have it or you don't. And I think that aspect of combat sports is the reason that, and this is true of jiu-jitsu, there are a lot of people on the right in this space for sure. And I think it's combat sort of weeds that out, you know. We want meritocracy, we want competition, we don't shy away from combat. These are all, you know, these are traits that I think are inherent sort of to the right, and why you kind of come across a lot of right-wing politics in jiu-jitsu. But with that said, you know, it's exploding in popularity now, and it sucks. You know, you go to Worlds in Vegas, you go down to Pans in Florida. I mean, it's the mullets and the stupid rash guards and it's, you know, all these leg lockers. You had Jefferson Leon. He's a dirty leg locker. You know, it sort of changed you're seeing the politics and the general image of the sport sort of morph a little bit right now because of how popular it's getting.
Yeah, I want to go back to what you said, because, you know, this is really what I found attractive about it, right? It's like, look, I'm under no illusions of, in any way becoming a professional fighter or competitor, right? It's not really something I'm interested in.
Same here.
But as someone who, spent a significant part of their life as basically a fat, unathletic kid, and then rediscovered first, weight training, and then, later other pursuits, that's very, very good for you. Obviously, both on the physical plane, but also I think for a lot of people, and I'm not naming names, but I see this in our circles, who at a younger age are kind of, smart intellectual types, but aren't super physically gifted, get in this mindset of basically, well, I'm better than that. I don't need to know how to do that because I'm smarter than you. And
weapons grade copium.
100%. One, you're not as smart as you think you are. And then two, the moment you come into a situation where you're like, oh, fuck, I have no tools for this. I am screwed. Yeah. And I know exactly when it happened. It's actually, and I for obvious reasons, don't talk about this on the internet. It's the same moment I got interested in guns. I was at a pretty rough dog attack where I just got like absolute. I mean, it's an animal, right? What are you going to do?
Right. Yeah.
And I basically in that moment was like, oh, fuck, I need to make a change, right? Like this has to, we have to make something happen here. And, okay, look, that's a dramatic version of it. But I think as well, right, the realization that one, you can be really bad at something and get better is incredibly empowering, especially for young men. And I don't mean that in the kind of like the gay self-help way, but also from another perspective, it's probably good for you to be in a situation where you are completely, totally, and objectively the worst at something. I don't know. I think it's good for young men, but you can probably speak to that more than I can.
No, it is. And, I took part in one of Paul's, one of my brother, he had a campaign maybe a year or two ago. There was sort of a group campaign, a lot of young men, committing to doing certain things for 30 days. And one of the things we did was we read Robert Greene's, Robert Greene's Mastery. And in that, he talks a lot about the apprentice mindset and how you have to go into something and just say, I know nothing. That's the mindset you have to have. And you can either have that mindset when you come into something, but with jiu-jitsu, it doesn't matter if you have that mindset or not. It'll get beaten into you. You'll learn real quick. I know a lot of arrogant blue belts out there. These guys, they'll talk a big game. They act like they're, discovering new moves and systems and everything, but they're going to get the shit kicked out of them when they get on the mat. And so I think that it is, to answer your question, yes, it is very, very good for young men to have that. But the great thing about jiu-jitsu is it doesn't matter if you have that or not. Just show up and come on the mats, and you'll either have it or it'll get beaten into you.
It reminds me of an article I read. I think I sent it to you on Twitter a very long time ago, but it was comparing and contrasting sort of a Western and Eastern method of teaching. And actually, this is the first thing I noticed when I showed up, right? Is that, in most skills I've been taught, you learn it the same way you learn to read, right? Like, okay, here are the letters, here's the phonics. You sort of build from, these small building blocks into more complex topics. Where, at least at the gym, it's like, all right, nice to meet you. Get on the mat. Let's go. Yeah. And, it's a very different style of learning. I think both have their pros and cons. But can you speak to that kind of learning by doing strategy?
Yeah. And, to be clear, there's no real set way. There kind of is like one old school way that like every class kind of used to go. But more and more, there's no real set way of teaching it. You ask 10 different coaches, you'll get 10 different answers. But ultimately, they all have that one thing in common. Yeah, you have to show up, you get on the mats, and you're going to be expected, almost not expected, but you'll feel as if you're expected to know a lot. I remember that as a white belt. But that's the other thing that's great is everyone on the mats remembers what it was like their first class. I remember my first class. You remember what it's like to know nothing. You remember how intimidated you were to show up. So everybody in that room is usually going out of their way to make you feel welcome and comfortable because we all remember. We all went through that same thing.
Yeah, it's an interesting difference from what I was expecting. And I don't want to oversimplify it, right? Obviously, there are techniques that you're taught, but yeah, I mean, it you feel like you're drowning, right? I mean, some cases
Oh
literally,
yeah,
right,
you're
as the
drowning in
air is removed from your body.
yeah, yeah. It's like you're drinking from a fire hydrant for sure.
So yeah, man, I one of the other things that you've mentioned to me before is that, and this kind of ties into your earlier biography, is your kind of discovery of Orthodox Christianity. And
Mhm.
look, like I'm not an Orthodox Christian, but a great many of my friends are, so I can say it is what I meant. And one of the things you notice from the outside looking in is that a lot of Orthodox converts are converts, right? They're later in life. They maybe come from a previous Christian tradition. So, do you want to speak to maybe your experience and then what you've noticed in other converts?
Yeah, yeah. Orthodox converts. Oh man. I was raised Anglican. My father was an Anglican priest, well, originally an Episcopal priest, a very principled and traditional man who left the church over the issue of women's ordination, and left a very successful career, a house, a car, a pension, and had 4 young children to take care of, and did what he had to do to make sure my mother didn't have to work. But eventually came back to what we called the continuing Anglican movement, which was a large sect that broke off into many other little pieces of 1928 prayer book Anglicans, high church Protestants, and I loved it. I really, really have, and I still do. I have a lot of love in my heart for the Anglican Church, the traditional one, not with some globo homo, female priest or whatever, but the 1928 prayer book traditional Anglicans. That's what I grew up in. That's what I was very comfortable. I went to seminary when I was 19 or 20 out in California. I left after a year. I saw a lot of, I won't bore everyone with the politics that my father went through as a bishop in that church. But because of how principled and traditional he was, and he got basically kicked out. He left, but it was, sort of you resigned. And he converted to Orthodoxy. But during the time that he was going through that, and right before he converted to Orthodoxy, that whole situation and the politics and a lot of other things going on in my personal life pushed me away from the church. And probably like a lot of your listeners out there, in my early 20s, mid 20s, I left the church and never really gave it another thought. It's crazy to me to think that I lived for the next, goodness, almost 20 years with not a thought. And if I go back, yes, there were thoughts. Yes, he was still there inside me, but it was just, I had quieted that voice so much. And so I really didn't live my life according to any kind of principle, any kind of compass at all. And yeah, which is, not surprising that it all ended up, leading me into bad places in my life. But when I came back out here to Virginia, even then, it wasn't even in my head. I stayed with my folks for a couple months when I first moved out here. It never once entered my head. And as crazy as it sounds, it was a pretty hardcore acid trip that I took by myself in my house where I'm sitting right now. And I can't even really tell you what came from that. I can't really tell you what happened. I just remembered after about 4 hours of what I was experiencing, I just knew that it was that was the truth, that I turned my back on the truth. And the next thing I did when I sort of came out of that fog was I called my dad and I said, I'm coming back to church and I want to know what the process is as far as inquirer's class or catechumen. And I want to convert to Orthodoxy. I've never been more sure of anything in my life.
Yeah, I think that, and look, as well, obviously.
And real quick, sorry, just to be clear, because I know it's such an outsider insider thing. I am not Orthodox today. I've had, because of living my life without that compass, I have some roadblocks that I sort of put in my own way. I live with my girlfriend. I have a couple other things I have to kind of clean up and figure out before obvious. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe your dad, they don't understand because they go to these, USDA is certified Globo Homo Church of the whatever goddess. They don't understand a church being principled and having rules. And so they're like, they can't believe that I can't become Orthodox because I'm living with my girlfriend. And I tell them I wouldn't go to a church that would accept that.
Yeah, this ties into another conversation you and I have had about the importance of exclusivity. And I'll qualify that, right? Because when it comes to a church, it's like it's exclusive with an asterisk, right?
Right.
You need to make certain changes, right? But oftentimes on the right, we talk about hierarchy. If we can broadly define the right as believing in hierarchy and the left as equality. But it's very easy to say that and then get kind of up in a huff when you're not allowed to do what you want to do.
Right.
And you and I were talking about a prominent neo-pagan organization. I'll leave it there. And I had something similar, right? Like this thing wouldn't be cool if I could go there, right? If I could be a member, just some random guy off the street who's
right.
a Christian guy. Now, don't get me wrong, like they don't want me as a member, nor would I want to apply. It's just kind of a hypothetical example.
Yeah.
And it's something, again, because actually I remembered, and this has been several months now when you told me about your church making that decision. It was something that I found really admirable, because so often you see leaders, particularly religious leaders, compromise on that. And then, we see exactly what those churches turn into 20, 30 years down the line.
Yeah. Well, you get like my dad leaving the Episcopal Church. He told him, it's a female priest today. What is it tomorrow? Well, I'll tell you what it was tomorrow. It was Bishop Gene Robinson, an openly homosexual bishop being consecrated by the Episcopal Church. We know where it goes because progressives never stop progressing. It doesn't matter how ridiculous they get. It doesn't matter if they're transing kids. It doesn't matter. They can be like, oh, gay marriage. There's a lot of people out there probably that are like, gay marriage. That makes a lot of sense. Let's just let homosexuals marry. Because that, and I understand that. I have a lot of friends who are gay. I can understand that. But what I knew at that time and have been proven correct on is they're not going to stop there. The agenda doesn't stop. And if you give them an inch, they will take infinity miles because they will never stop.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's one of those pieces of received wisdom that's a complete total lie. Right. Oh, it's the slippery slope fallacy. People never make logical conclusions from their premises,
Right.
And then you look at, let's just say the last 70 years of kind of the current American regime and say like, no, this isn't a fallacy. This is just we have taken a lot of data and projected a trend into the future that so far has proved extremely accurate.
It's been proven
it's just one of those kind of rhetorical tricks. Yeah.
Yeah. Every time.
Yeah. It's something that, and I see this often in Protestant circles, right? I go to a fairly conservative church, and so I'm kind of insulated from, the broader evangelical movement. I don't really see it. I don't interact with it, but every once in a while, I sort of stumble upon these people, right? Like I just interact with them, and I feel like I'm in a zoo, right? I'm like, where did you come from? And the most recent example of this is a group, and it's not really a new thing. They've branded themselves as kind of deconstructed Christians or ex-evangelicals, and they're basically making similar arguments that kind of new atheists were 15 years ago. But what they've essentially done is decided that any one of these behaviors, right, that the regime approves of, well, we need to bring that in, and it's all under this kind of banner of being, affirming. Like we'll get more people in the door. We'll appeal to a broader audience, And look, like, you've spoken in your own experience, that doesn't work. Obviously, this will not work. But still, that same.
It might work as a business. It might work as a business decision for you, but it's not going to work when it comes on, when Judgment Day rolls around. You're not going to think it worked.
Well, exactly. I had a conversation with a guy a while back. He's kind of a kooky guy, sort of like a Silicon Valley, tech guy, big in the like pro-natalist. So like we should be having lots of kids sphere. And, it's interesting because one of the pieces of that is that he wants to design sort of his own kind of like maximally open, maximally viable religion entirely for the point of promoting, a healthy birth rate. Right. So he wants to, like, almost in a test tube. Yeah, it's a weird idea, right?
So your friend's a cult leader.
I wouldn't say friend or cult leader. He is a guy I spoke to on the internet. I'll leave it at that. But one of the things about that, and actually it does connect to what you were saying, is that, when it comes to like, when it comes to a faith, when it comes to religion, it is, like Kierkegaard said, it's pre-rational. And the moment that you're making these sort of compromises of like, oh, well, and this makes, this would be better, this would make more sense, you've kind of lost the point of it, right? Because you've already sort of compromised on that. So I'm curious, do you see what I'm getting at there?
Absolutely. There can be no compromise at all when it comes to faith. So for me, while I'm not Orthodox, I certainly ascribe to that belief system. And I do view the Orthodox Church as the one true church. I do. I think that, my old journalist blood, basically when you're like, oh, well, I'm going to go back to church. Well, what church should I go to? Well, what was the early church like? Is there anyone out there doing that or anything close to it? And so to me, that made the decision easy. I remember talking with my dad shortly after I come back to the church, and I said, why weren't we always Orthodox? Like when you left the Episcopal Church, at least, because he converted in college, he wasn't a lifelong Christian. I said, when you left the Episcopal Church, why did you not convert to Orthodoxy? It seems like that's what should have happened. And in fact, they're very good friends. If any of your listeners are Orthodox, they'll know the name. My mom's best friend growing up, my dad went to seminary with Father Gregory Matthews Green, who's married to Frederica Matthews Green, a very prominent Orthodox author. Those are my parents' best friends. They just went to Ireland together. I was at the beach with their kids growing up. We took family vacations together. They went to seminary together. And when he left the Episcopal Church, he went Orthodox. And my dad went on this 20 odd year journey that ended up at Orthodoxy. But to me, it was just such a simple choice. I wanted that. I wanted something that existed completely outside of time. I wanted to experience something that I felt like was as close to what the early church was doing as possible. And that's why I love Orthodoxy. And that's why I go to an Orthodox church. And because ultimately I believe that I'm trying to become a part of a sect of Christians that are dedicated to preserving that and do it. And to bring it back to your question, doing so in such an unflinching manner that when you do hear these like little progressive rising ups, should we have women readers or, whatever, the little thing that whatever they're trying to get their foot in the door in, it's comforting to see that those people are usually in the minority, a very, very small minority.
Yeah, I had a funny conversation with Bagby, right, a mutual friend of ours, and he was describing the process of a progressive family showing up to your church, and he said that they were very, very confused. After a few weeks, they're like, "Oh, these people believe that it is sort of the laundry list, the standard kind of like Orthodox Christian beliefs." Right. And, he's just like, well, yes, of course, it's an Orthodox church. And they were very, very upset by it. But obviously, it's an extreme minority position within the community. And it's refreshing to see, shall we say, a broadly solid, religious community like that. I think one thing that does help the Orthodox is that they're relatively obscure still. That's changing, right? Especially in the era of the internet. But I think that when Orthodoxy in America was largely an ethnic phenomenon, right? When it was something that Greeks and Russians did, there was less of an apparatus set up to infiltrate it, right? Like you
COVID,
saw.
I think COVID changed that. It was COVID for sure. That's when the explosion. When you look at like conversions and everything, because you saw, my dad wasn't doing Zoom church. Are you high? Come on, like they were doing it in person, and I think when people started, that was a really big influx of converts for sure. And you were asking about converts earlier. The problem with Orthodoxy, well, it's not the problem with Orthodoxy. The problem with Orthodox converts is just like every other Christian convert. They're on fire. The good thing is they're on fire. But where you get some people who are on fire for the Lord, who are on fire for Christ, you get some people who are on fire to be an apologist. And the water hasn't even dried from their baptismal font yet. And they're trying to be out on the internet. Dude, when I was in Inquirer's class, we get a lot of kids who convert. And I'm in an Inquirer's class. So these kids they were raised evangelical. They've been coming to an Orthodox church for 6 months, a year. And they were asking my dad questions in the Inquirer's class, like, how do I refute these points? Like, how do you turn me into Jay Dyer? They all want to be apologists. And to me, I had that fire when I was 20, 21. When I was in seminary, that's what I wanted. I wanted to be a great apologist for the faith. And I do think there's great value in that. But I think those people who that's their calling are so few and far between. And you end up with a ton of people who have no business, whether from a credibility standpoint or otherwise, they have no business doing it. And you get a lot of that. I've seen a lot of that in Orthodoxy. People coming in and then immediate converting and then just wanting to shit on everybody else. And, I'm 43. I'm not 23, but I have a lot of love in my heart for my Protestant brothers and sisters out there, especially the ones out there who are doing it in these conservative churches that are, as far as I'm concerned, in their own way, unflinching in the face of the world.
Yeah, I think that, and it's funny that you bring up Jay Dyer because he has tried to debate me among other people. But I honestly, and it's funny.
I wouldn't want any part of that. Like I would destroy. I could be right about everything, and he would still destroy me, make me feel like an idiot, and then win the online poll.
It's funny because the thing he wanted me to debate on was I made a joke about how online Orthodox converts were irritating. And he's like, "What do you want to debate about it?" I was like, "One, I think this proved my point. Two, what is the logical proof for someone being annoying? That's by definition a completely subjective feeling." So nonetheless,
if you could find a way to crush somebody at it, Dyer would find a way.
I have nothing against Jay Dyer. I think he's just
neither do I. I think he has brought for any criticisms of Jay. I think he has brought countless people to Christ.
I just think he has,
Orthodoxy,
as we would say, a touch of the tism, right? He can
it's just a little spectrum out. I mean, most real cool people have got a little bit,
Yeah, exactly. Glass houses and all. But and this is something you see. I mean, you see it in right wing politics as well, right? Is that guys like they take the red pill and then they just go nuts with it. Right. And look, like that zeal is commendable, especially if you see some sort of injustice, something that's wrong. Right. And you want to.
It's commendable, but it's exhausting, bro. Like,
yes.
Anybody who finds out something that a large number of other people know far more about than you, like you're going to be so exhausting to all of them. I think about like Jake Shields on X, like 3 weeks ago, where, after October 7th, basically finds out that he's read everything. He's like, he immediately, like that guy, he read one book and that's become his entire identity. That's his entire identity on X. A year ago, it was just like MMA fights and maybe a little right-wing politics. And now that's his whole identity and it's exhausting. Have you ever read this book? Yes. 20 years ago, you're not unearthing new material. You're just finding out. It's just like in jiu-jitsu. And I hate to be the guy, but I do this. I make everything about jiu-jitsu. It's just like in jiu-jitsu when you get a blue belt, some arrogant blue belt go, I've discovered this move. Well, what you mean is you learned a move that has existed for decades that a lot of other people do. What you're saying is you found it out on your own, but it doesn't mean you invented it, right? And it's the same thing. It's exhausting to deal with. It's so exhausting. And like you said, to use your word, it's annoying. They're annoying.
Yeah, I think that and I'm in a constant, like, it's so over, we're so back with the online right, where half the time I'm like, these guys are great and they're super smart. And the other time I'm like, I want to drown 85% of you in a bathtub.
And then drown myself because I just read one of James Kirkpatrick's tweets or whatever.
James Kirkpatrick, who I like quite a lot, is the most depressing man on the planet.
He is a great guy, but we call him, that's what we call him, the bleak pillar. Or we say we should start a podcast called The Bleak Pill.
But I think that, a big part of that is sort of the illusion of, because if something is growing, right, and you said this earlier with jiu-jitsu, you're getting more and more people on the front end of that curve, right, who are finding things out for the first time, and from their perspective, these are completely revolutionary. Look, I get it, but at the same time, dude, calm down. There's a similar thing that happens in I'm going to edit that pause out because it sounded like I had a stroke. There's a similar thing that happens in Calvinist circles, right, where people talk about, going through that first year.
Speaking of annoying.
Hey, look at I guess, okay, fair enough. I did call online orthos annoying, so you know what? We're throwing hands here.
I got to get a point back for the ortho bros here.
Well, look, as someone who will regularly chokes me with an inch of my life, I don't really know anything out of that. But you see the same dynamic. And I think that it's particularly helpful for, guys who are sort of farther along. And look, like, I'm in my mid-20s. I'm not exactly an old head here, but I've been on the right-wing internet long enough to see these cycles happen over and over again. And I think, if it's something that's, sort of some kind of ultimate truth, that it's commendable. But the thing that does really bother me is watching these young guys get sucked into something that's kind of like, it's exciting. It feels like this new revelation. And that thing goes away, right? I mean, just look at, Jan 6, look at these kind of recent riots in the UK, and, that kind of emotional high goes away. And now you're sitting in jail for 2 to 3 years. There was a guy who just got out of solitary confinement. He spent 40 days in solitary confinement without a charge. And so, like, to me, and maybe this is
countless stories. I've spoken to some of these guys on the phone from jail who are in there, and it's unbelievable what they're going through. To me, that alone is reason enough. You have to go out. You have to go out and vote for Trump. You have to vote for Trump. If you don't, and this is why I tell people at my church, I don't know. I'm not political. I do not give a shit. Go register to vote and go vote for Trump and save this country, or at least buy us a little bit of time, because it is so clear cut. And if that's not enough of a reason right there, is just getting some of those nonviolent, at least the ones who are nonviolent, pardoned immediately. It has to happen. And if that's not enough for you to vote for them, then, I tell them this at my church. I'm like, I want to hear you say it here in church. Tell me that you're for transing kids, because that's what you're saying, but I want you to say it here in front of God. Like, that's what this election comes down to, is like, it's a culture war for sure. And I'm not trying to tell you Trump is the savior. That's not it. But it's such a clear-cut choice that it doesn't matter what you think about Trump. If you care about the January 6th prisoners, if you care about political prisoners in this country, if you care about the DOJ getting weaponized, if you don't want to see us be a third world country quite yet, then we have to stop this immigration. We have to stop these open borders. We have to stop these kids getting transed and taken away from their families. And January 6th to me that's reason enough for me, but some people might need a little more.
Yeah, I think that, and this is something that kind of continually bothers me. And I didn't mean to just turn this into complaining about groups of people on the internet, but it is.
Hey, whatever. That's fun too.
Where it's this sort of false dichotomy, and actually, this has recently happened with the pro-life movement, right? The so-called abortion abolitionists, who basically they say, well, Trump isn't anti-abortion enough, so I won't vote. Right. I'll punish him, and right. Next time the Republican will be more anti-abortion.
I'll punish him by making sure someone gets elected that's fine with an abortion at 25 weeks or whatever crazy radical view the Democrats are putting out now.
Well, exactly, right? Because
that's your punishment.
Not only is that your punishment, but let's look at recent track records, right? Who got you what your movement was trying to do for 50 years? And Roe versus
for 50 years, dude. I grew up in a house in a very, very my mother to this day would never vote for a candidate who was not pro-life. I grew up in a extremely pro-life house, and then left became like, oh, I don't know, maybe this isn't something the government should. No, of course it is. Like, you can't have it both ways here, and that's why I only respect people who are, it's all or nothing to me. These people who try to pick weeks and like if it's this situation or this situation, you either believe it's a life or you don't. Like, that's all it comes down to, right?
Well, definitely. And so, let's say that you have the beliefs that you and I do about abortion, right?
So and that's one of those funny ones. By the way, that's one of those funny ones at the Orthodox Church where we say, and we pray for the souls of all victims of abortion, and everyone crosses themselves. I do a scan of the church, and usually a couple visitors will be like, "You see the eye."
You're on the libtard patrol. You're looking for.
Yeah, always on shit lib patrol for sure.
But to go back to that false dichotomy, right? Where, look, like you were not in a position of tactical superiority. You don't really have a lot of good choices. You're presented with a binary, like you said. And look, like, if someone's take, which is something I guess I can kind of respect, is like I won't interact with politics whatsoever. I'm just going to live my own life. Like, I disagree with that, but I can kind of get it. To me,
I agree with you there. Yeah.
To present yourself as kind of playing the game, and then basically say, this is the most immoral act possible. It's murdered of an innocent child. But given the choice between, let's just say, using round numbers here, 1 million and 400,000. Well, any number is too bad. So I guess I'll let the guy who wants 1 million abortions win. Right? It's like you're presenting this false dichotomy and cloaking yourself in this kind of unearned moral superiority. And it drives me up the walls crazy.
Yeah. This is, it's one of those things where I absolutely despise Crenshaw, but he was on Bill Maher the other night, and they were trying to like pit the other guy on the show. Carville was on the show with him, and Carville was trying to like gotcha him and like pin him down on an abortion question. And he's like, would that be okay with you? And Crenshaw just kind of looked at him and he goes, you're not going to get me on this. It's a very easy for me. This is a very easy question for me because he's pro-life and at least the way he presents himself. So for all the other problems with Crenshaw, it was refreshing to hear someone just be like, no, you're never going to trick me with a question about abortion. That's the refreshing thing about being extremely staunchly pro-life, is you'll never get me in any kind of gotcha. What if this scenario? I don't care. I don't care if she was raped. I don't care. I shouldn't say that. It's not that I don't care if she was raped. Of course, rape is horrible, but I don't care how the pregnancy happened. I don't care who did it. I don't care if it was a member of the family. I do not care. It's a living human being. You can't have the state. We cannot live in a society where it's okay to murder children.
Well, and look, like, I think that that kind of moral absolutism it's something that I think that we as a culture have really lost, and it's sort of a lost confidence, right? You see this even in media, which if you look at kind of like media from a more confident America, right? And look, this isn't to my taste, but it's the hero is good at everything. He's great. He has no moral flaws. And evil is just evil, right? You're not asking for, the motivations, right? You're not really digging into why, the cowboy with the black hat has the, the woman tied to a train tracks. And look, that's not very complicated, but it speaks to kind of a confident culture, right? A culture that is agreed about what is right and what is wrong. So when we go back to the beginning of this conversation and we talked about, how do you live in, a culture that is so fractious, right? That can't agree about these very basic, like very deep level issues. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that we as a culture have lost all confidence, because we're not morally unified. I mean, really at all.
It's a good point. Yeah, that is a good point. And I think that I don't see, everybody call it, I'm a white pillar, very hardcore white pillar. And even I have a hard time at times seeing what the route is to us winning because of how fractured everything is. And, you think about, well, what would them winning look like? That you can make that in your head. That's not that hard, right? We've already seen some of it. Like how hard is it to, like, after COVID, think about getting put in a camp, Like, if you think about what the other side winning looks like, then you can start giving yourself an idea. And the problem with the right is the left will say, this is what winning looks like. We're going to put you all in camps. The right is like, oh, we have these moral questions. They want to talk about it. They'll want to discuss it and debate it. The other side is being ruthless. They are ruthless. And that's why we're losing.
Well, Seth, we are coming up on time. This has been a great conversation. Thanks for coming out, man. But if people want to find you, what's a good way for them to do that?
Well, I've been banned on pretty much every other platform. Instagram won't have me. Facebook won't have me. But if they want to find me, on X, I'm just Seth Waggener on X. If you can't find a way to spell it, just I'm sure you can find my brothers online too. X is pretty much it. And then we also have an account for Devotion Jiu-Jitsu, which is our studio there, which is also, a pretty radical place and a place that's, how should I say it, friendly to people like me.
Yeah, as someone who's gone to Devotion more than a few times, if you're looking for a place to meet like-minded people and to get choked out and just watch your life recede, well, I highly recommend Devotion. I've only been seriously choked twice. Anyway, yeah, that's pretty.
Put down. Tell these intellectual right wingers put down the book for one night and come in and drop the cope. Come in and learn how to fight, make yourself dangerous, make yourself harder to kill. The left is trying to kill you.
Yeah, that's something that I've really been banging on recently, and we didn't really get into it, but I think that on kind of a spiritual level, it's good for men to be dangerous.
Absolutely.
As far as my stuff, you can find the Jay Burden Show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also check out my sponsor, Axios Remote Fitness and Coaching. Speaking of people who are hard to kill, not only is JD the owner of Axios, a just genuinely frightening human being. But he's also pretty good at fighting. And if you're interested in either one of those, I'd highly recommend his services. The links to that can be found in the description, as well as the links to Seth's stuff. And remember, keep your head up. The light can't last forever. Good night.